Arvoyarns.
Maybe a little bit younger, a friend I went to high school with, she was really encouraging me to read The Fountainhead, which a lot of people know from the scene in Dirty Dancing when it's mentioned by this guy who the one who raped Penny, or didn't rape. I don't think he raped Penny. I think he's got Penny pregnant, and then wasn't willing to help Bobby. Bobby was real jerk.
I've been recently thinking about Ayn Rand in terms of in Mad Men.
Okay.
Bert Cooper, founder of the company, so always talking about Ayn Rand.
What did he do?
He just always talking about Ayn Rand. I think they were friends, like at least in the world of the show, maybe earlier.
Ayn Rand is still really prevalent, and
It's crazy.
Yeah, I mean the Koch brothers.
Koch brothers. Alan Greenspan.
Yeah. So
Greenspan.
yeah.
We're friends,
And meanwhile, I've really dated myself with talking about the first Karate Kid from 1984, and now Dirty Dancing. But in any case, I finally she told me for a while to read it, and I read it over the summer of maybe 2000, 2001, and it was just really eye-opening for me, and it helped me in a lot of ways. Just to, part of her philosophy is pursue things the way you want to pursue them. Don't let other people pull you down. Don't if you have an idea and you think it's a good idea and you think it's a positive idea and something you want to pursue, and everybody around you tells you, oh, you'll never be able to do that, or oh, don't do that. In that regard, Ayn Rand's message can be very positive and really help people. Over time, and she's I don't remember if she wrote another book. I read The Fountainhead. I read Atlas Shrugged. I read both of those that summer, and I'd previously read Anthem years before for high school class. I didn't read any of her other stuff, but she'd written either an essay or a book called The Virtue of Selfishness. So she took selfishness, as sort of like, for her, the virtue of selfishness, or individual self-interest, she looked at that as the basis for all capitalism, and she looked at capitalism as being able to solve any problem. As I got older, looking back on her writing, first of all, she certainly wouldn't be one of my favorite writers from a stylistic standpoint, or just, from enjoying the actual writing. I mean, the last, I don't even remember, 30, 40, 50 pages of both The Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged are just the main characters, or at least The Fountainhead, just kind of going on some long monologue about why what he did, in the case of The Fountainhead, what Howard Rourke did, was just the perfect thing to do, and there's just no way, nothing else that could have been done or should have been done. But also, I don't believe that capitalism can solve all of the world's problems. I don't believe.
Well, yeah, it also seems like no, I haven't read that much Ayn Rand. Actually, I got my libertarian whatever from this guy Terry Goodkind, who wrote fantasy series called A Sword of Truth, which I think played a similar role. But I don't know. I think about Ayn Rand so much the early 20th or first half of the 20th century, especially, is obsessed with this idea of mass culture, because you had radio, television coming along, but just in general, the masses are rising up, right? We're going to form the Soviet Union, this and that. People trying to understand. I remember in college reading a book, The Revolt of the Masses, and Ayn Rand seems to be in this sort of tradition where there's the sort of the mass individual who's just sort of content to just they're doing their own thing, and they're constantly dragging down these elite people who are the brilliant ones who are and it's just interesting to me the extent to which people continue to relate to her work at a psychological level, even though so many things about society have changed.
And she so just as an example, she sees business or each business person as sort of this individual unit who should just pursue their own self-interest. Market dynamics will take shape. Everything works out, right? She seemed like vehemently against like any sort of like trade organization. She thought they were just a waste of time. I've been really involved with SMART, who I mentioned earlier. I've been on their board since 2011, and I see a lot of value in trade organizations to represent the interests of that particular industry. I remember being in college and reading. This was probably just one line from this particular case study, but it stayed with me. And the perfect business model, okay, the perfect business model is a PO box where people send checks. Mm-hmm. Okay, so if you look at business, right, and you look at the object of a business being to make a profit or make money, right? How do you make money? Okay, you have higher revenue than cost, right? So this was like, I think this was a Harvard Business School case study, and again, it was probably just one line, but right? What's lower cost than a PO box, right? You have no cost, okay, but you have revenue just pouring in, right? Okay, mm-hmm. So think about that as your ideal business from a purely dollars and cents sort of perspective, right? So now look at businesses. Look at a major chemical manufacturer. Okay, if it's cheaper, if it's a lower cost for them to pour all of their runoff around their factory and just dump it all out and let it. Mm-hmm. Who cares if it goes into people's drinking water and into the streams and just completely destroys the environment and makes people sick, and you have deformed babies in that area because this chemical manufacturer because it was a better business decision for them to just dump it out all over the place, right? So Ayn Rand, her answer would have been eventually market dynamics would have taken hold, and because all these people were deformed and dying and sick, there would have been a need for a company to come along and clean all of that up or something, right? But realistically, is that really what's going to happen, right? When this chemical company is paying off local politics or what, whatever it is.
The movie, Todd Haynes movie about like DuPont, poisoning West Virginia.
I haven't seen it, but that's probably based on
a true story.
The lawyer.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes, so I read the New York Times article about that lawyer, and it was like blown away. Mm-hmm. So to me, it's like I just don't think it's realistic that that market dynamics are going to solve all the world's problems. Now, I'm not a socialist or a communist or someone who's like ultra far left. I probably fall somewhere in the middle. Sure. In the sense that there are some issues where I lean right, and other issues I lean left. But regardless, I don't know that Ayn Rand took everything into consideration in her philosophy. I don't think her philosophy was all encompassing. Even though if she was here, she would scream and yell and say that
what do you think it
I'm
came
wrong.
From in her life? So, I get the sense it was just like a projection of an unhappy childhood onto like social and economic relationships.
She grew up
probably people in her class like made fun of her.
I think she was born in communist. I think she was born in communist Russia. I believe she came over from the Soviet Union, where
you gotta say the Soviet Union did not help the communist cause. It's really counterproductive.
I
heard counter to that. I heard that Stalin was only 5 million people away from successfully creating a utopia via the Great Purge method. I'm just joking. That was an Onion article title I saw recently. Yeah.
Nothing like a purge joke.
Yeah, nothing like a purge joke. It's interesting, man. Right. I think that's what it has to do with a lot at the end of the day. People.
Yeah, because whereas when I think about socialism these days, it's like my cousin Maggie had a great sweatshirt she was wearing. It said something like anti-social justice warrior.
Wow.
And I like that.
Because
the doubleness of it's not so much anti-social justice warrior, but anti-social justice warrior. And I was that's me. I'm a socialist personally, but that doesn't necessarily mean I like being social. You know what I mean? Like,
This is really interesting, right? Because I think people think about, okay, well, these people are trying to think about what's best for the world, and so to speak, right? But then you bring up the thing of, well, what was their childhood like?
Mhm.
What was their upbringing like? What was the cultivation of their physical lens of how they see reality, right? And that just doesn't get talked about enough. How, at the end of the day, the way people talk, the way people walk, the way people work, they interact with each other, the ways that they live their lives, it's so heavily dependent on their own self-image. It's so heavily dependent on the type of family or lack thereof that they had when they grew up, their social dynamics and everything.
Mhm.
And people think of it as this really black or white thing, but it's all so emotionally charged
Definitely. Yeah.
for these underlying fulfillments that these deluges.
You also just summarized the thinking behind every Star Wars plot for the last, at least since Disney took over. Really, probably all along.
What, that it needs to be all black and white and there can't be any?
No, just like family dynamics, sense of self, emotions.
I hated the new Star Wars movie. It's just so sad what they've done. Although The Mandalorian's fantastic, they actually used, they studied, because it's like supposed to be like a spaghetti western type deal, right? With The Mandalorian, the TV show on Disney Plus. It's not a plug. If we would be so lucky for big corporate America to want to sponsor Arvoyarns, so we would have the opportunity to say no. That's not the case yet. But that show is really cool because they were actually so obsessed about getting that original trilogy, New Hope trilogy, Star Wars flair, that they studied the camera angles.
Sure.
And the lenses that they would use, and they said, okay, we're only using these lenses that they would use. We're only doing camera angles in the style that they would do it, and that's how it has that New Hope flair.
Yeah.
And it's really cool. It's really cool.
Yeah, that's interesting. I haven't seen it yet, actually. Yeah.
Conversely, Star Wars, the movies, atrocious. It's I think I was saying maybe to you the other day or somebody, I think it was you. I said. And this was before I saw the new Star Wars movie. I said the worst type of creativity is checkbox creativity, which is you say, okay, well, I have this goal of making this whatever. Instead of channeling my artistic process, it's, okay, let's get that funny thing. Okay, we now have the sexy thing. All right, where's the awkward thing, the sad thing, the redemptive thing? Here's the cool, enticing action sequence, and it's just checkbox movie making. That
it's formulaic.
It's terrible.
Yeah,
and it's terrible. It defeats everything.
Well, it's like when producers create boy bands and stuff like that, right? It's like and the songs are written for those boy bands, stuff like that. So are you a democratic socialist then, like what Bernie espouses? So okay.
Yeah, I think Bernie. I like Bernie.
You like Bernie?
I could go farther left, but I think Bernie is fine for now.
Okay. I don't have a candidate who I am really feeling any extreme love for at the moment. I have a lot of respect for Bernie. I mean, it amazes me how you've probably seen those videos where they show him speaking over the years and he's saying the exact
have you seen
same thing for the last 30
consistency.
So I respect that.
When he got arrested, I like him as a civil rights movement.
I don't know if I've seen that, but I like him as a senator. I don't know if I would personally back him for president for a variety of reasons, but I do respect him.
Yeah, I mean I like that. Yeah, both the consistency and then also just the people that he would bring along with him, just the whole DSA apparatus and all these people working on policy. Because in my mind, what's the president compared to
all
the
the
people
policymakers?
who, have the ideas and the programs and stuff like that. And
he scares me a little bit. In the sense of potentially, for my taste, being a little too far left and just not having a good understanding, a good understanding of of businesses and business. Now, no, I understand that there are extremes the other way, but you know, I don't love the villainization of some of these large companies, especially when it's like across the board. So
Sure. Well, but
yeah.
is that well? So, I mean, there's two issues. Like one is like, as you said, a villainization or a setting up of like, okay, this is like 1% versus 99% kind of thing.
Yeah.
Versus whatever his actual policies are.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah, and I don't know that much about exactly what his policies would be.
Yeah, 'cause his policies might be good for business.
Here's the thing about that I think that ultimately his policies would be good for business, but in the short term they wouldn't. It's the type of thing when we were talking about the infrastructure before, about having things built up to a certain extent, because I think what inevitably happens is, and right, let's take his minimum wage. Let's take the minimum.
Yeah, like minimum wage or like, you know, child care. These
let's
things.
take the minimum wage one, right?
Wouldn't
so
a business be happy not to have to pay for those things?
Well,
The
here's
government could help out.
yeah, but
Business doesn't have to pay for their employees' insurance.
No.
Doesn't have to
So
pay
let's
for
take the
their
minimum wage thing, right?
daycare.
So this is a really interesting thing, right? And you see it in Australia. And I lived in Australia, right? So the minimum wage in Australia is $22.50, dude. It's fucking ridiculous.
That's U.S. dollars. That's
I know it's AUD, but it converts to 18 to 20, depending.
that's
on
countrywide.
Yeah, and so I think the highest minimum wage in the United States is 15, and it's interesting because you say, okay, all businesses minimum you can pay is 15, let's say, and then all these businesses are like, that's 3 or 4 times what our margin is right now for work. It's gonna kill us. We're not gonna be able to do anything, right? But the interesting thing is that, yeah, you just took money away from the business in the short term because they have to pay more to the employees inevitably. But there's now, as far as your market is concerned, your market just got injected with maybe an order of magnitude more cash than it otherwise would have had.
Yeah, like you know.
And so it's interesting
pay
how
people more, they can spend more.
Yeah, exactly. So it's interesting how
But,
it
yeah,
goes
I mean,
both ways. But how fast does that balance out?
Yeah.
And
I mean,
that's
the general
I think
point
one
that,
of the
like,
biggest things.
Yeah, I mean, you can see that, like, things like the minimum wage, you know, certainly, like, a larger business is able to, like, recalibrate and, like, deal with that more easily than, like, a small business. But then when it comes to, like I was saying before, like, stuff like, you know, health insurance and so forth, I mean, to the extent that, you know, it's good for small business.
Having lived in Australia and New Zealand, you should 100% have, everyone should have health insurance. Everyone should have the ability to be protected to live. Absolutely. That is a basic human right that everybody should have.
It's weird that we get it through our, you know, most people get it through their...
What's interesting...
Arvoyarns.